are going to be creating a print using a styrofoam block. Now this particular piece of styrofoam I did get from an art supply company because it was already pre-cut and I could get enough for my whole class. But you could use anything. You could use a paper, or not a paper plate, a styrofoam plate. You could use the lid of a takeout container. You could use a veggie tray. I'd say a meat tray, but I don't know how clean you can get that. But at any rate, whatever you can obtain a piece of styrofoam, you can create a print block. So the way that we are going to do this so that we have kind of a specific image on our print block rather than just something that we make up random or a non-objective, meaning you can't recognize anything in it, although those are perfectly acceptable. So that's kind of a fun thing just as an activity. But for our class project, we are going to create this using a reference photo. So the very first step that I did was to get myself a piece of newsprint. It's just really flimsy paper. You could use printer paper or copy paper. And then I took my print block and I traced the outline so that I know how much space I have to create my image. Then I got a reference picture, and I have this great photo of a lobster. My family went on a vacation in Maine, which is the first time actually I'd ever eaten lobster, and I like it now, but it's expensive. But that's a different conversation. So I chose this lobster. I like the texture of this, and I kind of like how I cropped this so that you get the idea that it's a big lobster, right? So there's my reference picture. From there, I just took a pencil and I drew all the contours. Contours are outlines and edges. All right, so you can see his claw in the front. You get his little, what are these called? Are they antenna if they're on a lobster? I don't know. I'll have to look that up. Anyway, so I looked at my reference picture and I created this contour line drawing. All right, once I have a contour line drawing, it's important to go over it with ink so that you can see what that image is really truly going to look like later. And the way to turn this into something a little higher level is by using a variety. Here, I'll just write it down here for you. A variety of lines. Now, variety is a principle of design, and it is like if I go to the store and how about this? I have a variety of pens and pencils in this can, so I have more than one option. Actually, there's a paintbrush in there. See that paintbrush? We're going to use that in a minute. All right, so you have a variety of lines, and the obvious thing is that whatever your marker is makes a line. And you can have those lines, but if they all look that way, it becomes monotonous, which is the opposite of variety, and it's not very visually interesting. So there's different ways to create variety. One is just like if we were going to draw with a pencil, you can use hatch marks or even cross-hatching marks if you wanted to change the way this line looks. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you could lightly touch it and just let your pen skip across the page. And eyes will finish this line, but it's technically a broken line. It's also an option, all right, so if this is my line, to just thicken up sections of it. Okay, so I'm using my pen and making parts of this thicker than just my one pen length. So we want to consider variety when we're adding shading to this. So if I look at my reference picture, all right, one that really stands out to me is this line here where the pieces of the exoskeleton come together. Okay, so on my drawing, I could use this line along his top. All right, but then when I come in to this line, if I look at this reference picture, okay, it's already telling me that parts of it should be thicker. All right, okay, and I'm going to continue on with this to add the edges and the shading to this, and then we will go from there. All right, so now I just used my handy dandy reindeer scissors and cut this design out, because now I'm going to transfer this to my Styrofoam print block. Okay, now the important thing to keep in mind here is that when you're printing, so we'll just imagine that this is the print block, okay? And I'm going to turn this over to print it. So if you have words, especially, they will be backwards unless you turn it face down. And that's the great thing about the marker on this paper, is that I can see through it. So you're going to turn this face down. Now I don't have any words, so it really kind of in my case here, it doesn't matter if he's backwards when I flip it over, but I am going to show you upside down for the sake of discussion here. All right, and I'm going to use a couple little pieces of tape, to hold my drawing to the Styrofoam block, because I don't want it to wiggle around, or it will be difficult to transfer those lines. They'll be all wibble wobbled. The other thing you could do is put a paper clip on it to hold it, or you're creative, come up with something else that might work. Okay, I am going to use the handle of this paintbrush to press this in. I do want to point out that there's a couple problems with, say, if you use this, what is this thing? It's a clicky pencil, because it will cut through the Styrofoam instead of just pressing it down. And the same thing goes if you have a really sharp, just regular pencil. So when I put this on here, you can see how the edge of that, it actually cuts into the Styrofoam instead of squishing it down. And foam has air trapped inside there. That's why it's fluffy. And what we're trying to do is just press it down. You can see where I did some other ones over here. But we're just going to press it down, and we want to squish that air out of the foam. So you can see now, right, we have what's called relief, all right, which is where you have higher and lower areas on the surface. So it's not cut down into it, but it's squished instead. So my first step is to just trace over all the lines of my design. I finished transferring my lines, you can see the indentations in that Styrofoam. Okay, now the problem with this is that they're not actually deep enough to make high and low areas dramatic for the printing process. So I'm just going to take this off and continue squishing this Styrofoam until I have higher relief. Okay, so you can see those marks in there, but it's not squished down enough. So I'm gonna keep using my paintbrush handle. You could use a dull pencil. You could also use a pen that's not poked out, because remember that pokey part will cut into it rather than squish it down. Really anything you can come up with to squish down that Styrofoam. So the next step then is to just keep coming back into this and going over these lines, and you can already see how this is deeper, and that's what we want. You don't have to squish it so much you can see it through the back, although I guess I can a little bit, but you need to squish it enough that there's a clear indentation in the Styrofoam, because this isn't going to be enough texture to transfer when we print it later. So I am just going to keep squishing down my Styrofoam. Please remember that it's important to have a variety of lines. So when you're transferring this, you are still going to keep a variety of lines as you squish down that Styrofoam.